Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for coming and for tuning in today. My name is Rosa Hernandez. I'm the social media manager at Third Place Books. On behalf of this store, I am so pleased to welcome tonight's event with Emilly Prado, here to talk about her essay collection, Funeral for Flocka, in conversation with Ifrah F. Ahmed. Through virtual events like tonight, Third Place Books is fortunate to continue connecting readers with authors in an intimate setting. We sorely miss having authors in our stores, but at the same time, we're so thankful to have this new platform that brings our growing event series into your homes all across the world. Thank you again for tuning in and supporting independent bookstores. Coming up on our virtual events calendar, on August 2nd, we have Katie Kitamura for her highly anticipated new novel, Intimacies. On August 5th, we have Mona Awad with Heather O'Neill to discuss Mona's latest novel, All's Well, and so much more in store for you. You can find all our full event calendar on our website at thirdplacebooks.com, where I also encourage you to sign up for our email newsletter. In a couple of minutes in the Zoom chat, I'll be sharing a link to purchase tonight's feature book, Funeral for Flocka, which I'm currently reading, and it's so very good. And if you love music or pop culture, this is definitely for you. If you're in the Seattle area, you can order online and pick up in the store, or just swing by any one of our locations at Lake Forest Park, Ravenna, or Stewart Park. And we're happily open to the public, and we ship all across the country. Overall, thank you for sticking with us during the virtual era. It's strictly because of you that this author series is even possible. During tonight's event, I also love to remind you all that the chat window at the bottom of your screen is open, and we encourage you to use it respectfully. Tonight, we will also have some time for your questions. So if you have questions for our authors this evening, please submit those in the Q&A window, which is separate from the chat window at the bottom of your screen. Finally, as you may have experienced in virtual gatherings, technical issues may happen. If they do, we'll do our best to resolve them quickly. So thank you for your patience and understanding. And now, let's introduce tonight's speakers. Emilly Prado is a writer, community organizer, and the director of youth programs at Literacy Arts in Portland, Oregon. When not writing or teaching, Emilly moonlights as DJ Mami Miami with Noche Libre, the Latinx DJ collective she co-founded in 2017. Her debut essay collection, Funeral for Flocka, has been called utterly vulnerable, bold, and unique by Miss Magazine, and is a Yossi Book Club summer reads pick. Funeral for Flocka is out now with featured tense books, and you can order your copy from Third Place Books today. In conversation with Emilly today is, Ifrah F. Ahmed is a writer, creative director, and cook. She co-founded and edits the pioneer Somali arts and culture publication, Ariwilo. Ifrah is also the co-founder of Milk and Myrrh, a Somali culinary pop-up experience. She has been featured in the New York Times, Teen Vogue, and Nylon. Her writing and recipes have most recently appeared in the LA Times. Originally born in Somalia, she now splits her time between Brooklyn and Seattle. We're so pleased to have you here all today. Thank you for taking your time out of your busy evening, to be with us. Please welcome Emilly Prado and Ifrah F. Ahmed.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Emilly. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. And thanks so much to Third Place Books for hosting this wonderful event. I'm so excited about this, Emilly, and thank you for asking me to join you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ifrah, for offering to, be in conversation with me, and thanks to everyone here for joining us today.
Absolutely. And if you haven't had the chance to get Funeral for Flocka, definitely get it ASAP. Maybe even get it during this conversation. It's right behind Emilly right there. But yeah, shall we get into it?
Yeah, sounds good.
So Emilly, did you want to talk about how we met, and again, how we were able to reconnect? Because we met several years ago, right, online. But it's an interesting story.
Yeah, I don't know, like I don't remember the full details, but what I remember is that we were both in a Facebook group, and it was like a feminist centered, I'm not sure if it was Seattle focus or just like Pacific Northwest, but we both happened to be in the same group. And then it's funny because through conversation more recently, you were like, I was a moderator, which I didn't remember.
I honestly forgot myself, so.
Yeah, and basically some white nonsense happened in the group. I don't remember the details, but what I do remember is that I sort of was like, I'm out. I can't deal with this group anymore, which is unfortunate, right? Because I felt like, especially like in my early 20s, internet, and I think even still now, internet has been one of the best places to find community and to find folks who are like-minded. So it was a bummer, but I was, I couldn't be in the group anymore, and I announced my exit, and then you sent me a personal message, and we're basically just really supportive and was like, in solidarity, I'm sorry that you're leaving, and you're right, you were totally, spot on with whatever the critique was at the time. And it just meant a lot, and I was really grateful for that. And that's what I remember. It's like I remember more of like the positive part of you reaching out and being like, I feel you, as opposed to whatever it was that sparked the exit.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think now that I think back on it, I think the club started off as a Seattle thing, and then it, I think, branched off to Portland and became sort of like a regional online sort of like feminist space for people that were more kind of like in the music scene as well. And then it, extended. But yeah, I think there was definitely some white nonsense, as you put it, happening. And that's how we were able to connect with each other and kind of like remember each other from so many years ago. So it's funny that I think the group was also called Men's Rights Club because it was like an ironic kind of, tongue-in-cheek sort of like naming. So that's funny that the Men's Rights Club brought us together to speak today about your memoir, FOR FLACA.
It's true.
Cool. So shall we just get into it? I had a really such a range of emotions digging into your book, and like it just brought up so much, even like for myself. I think memoir is such a it's always such a vulnerable process to read someone else's like memoir and like the ways in which they like saw their own experiences and their own life, right? And I'm sure that it was equally kind of a vulnerable like process for you as well. I guess I just was wondering, like in the book, you say that you didn't grow up thinking that you would be a writer or thinking that you were a writer. But what's interesting to me is that you documented so much of your life, like kind of meticulously, like through diaries, and you were really writing like before you even realized you were like a writer. So what was that like for you to revisit some of those diaries,
Yeah. So in the book, I talk about my first introduction, what I feel like, to writing. Really was a diary that my sister gave me when I was 13 years old. Mm-hmm. And it was a significant gesture, not only because of my first diary, but because also me and my sister growing up did not really get along. And right. So like her offering me this thing that I then was like an important resource to me. She had found, I think, through writing in her own diary that she was able to sort of make sense of things. And so it was just pivotal to, I feel like, my survival. I feel like if I didn't have that space, I'm not sure where I would have had an outlet, because I didn't feel like I had an outlet to communicate and didn't really know how to communicate in the way that I wanted to. Often when I would try to speak when I was growing up, I would just like my throat, and I actually refer to this in the book, but like I'd feel like my throat tightening up, and when I was overwhelmed, I would just come to tears, and it was out of frustration and just not knowing how to say what I wanted to say without it also being sort of misinterpreted. And when I was rereading the diary, I reread it twice in preparation for the book. Before Funeral for Flacca was this version that we all see today, which is like twice as long. It originally was a chapbook that I made when I was at the Independent Publishing Resource Center in Portland, and it's about half as long. And it was like painful to read for sure, because there's a lot of like questioning and not knowing, for example, like what healthy relationships should look like. And it's just painful as an adult to look back, and I'm kind of like, I think these things feel weird, but I don't really know why.
Right.
And it was just hard to, especially with someone who works with youth, and just reading back and being like, I wish that I had known more things, and just more so feeling empathy, not like embarrassment or anything like that.
Absolutely,
and it was
absolutely.
Yeah, and it wasn't until I was 20 that I decided to like take ownership of being like, I'm a writer and I'm gonna own that name and see what happens. I didn't fully believe it yet, but I figured through saying it, that would be sort of a step in the right direction. And it was an important step, and that's also why I can like continue to advocate for folks to use that title right away, and also like artists, because the sooner that you can say it for yourself, the sooner that you'll believe it, and then others will also see it.
Yeah, I mean, I find that it's like more of like a journey, right? Like to be able to identify as someone who is a writer or someone who is like a creator of, art in some form. I feel like even for me personally, like, maybe you didn't grow up thinking of yourself that way because you didn't really necessarily see anyone calling it that, even if that's what they were doing, right? But even now, I think like 20 is like a very still young age to step into that and to like, own that for yourself. So that's really cool that you were able to do that at that age, because I know people that are much older than, 20 that are still kind of like getting comfortable with calling themselves that, because there's something that comes with like, there's a certain energy shift or like a power or whatever that comes with like being able to say it out loud and say that like, I'm a writer, or I'm an artist, or like I'm a creator of some form. So that's super cool that you were able to do that. I guess I was also curious, like when you were going back, I know that you said it was like painful to sort of review some of the situations that you had been in, and maybe you didn't know any different at that time, but did you find that like your memories were like accurate, or did you find that like there were like inconsistencies, or did you misremember anything?
There was a lot of misremembering in general, I think, like in the revision process that I learned about through what I called my like fact-checking process this time. When I made the chapbook, I was definitely like concerned with getting it right, but also was like, 20 people are going to read this and they're all going to be my friends, and like it's okay if it's not perfect. I just wanted to sort of get the class project done. But when I was reading through the diary, it wasn't so much, there was a couple moments where I definitely misremembered. I talk about like there was someone who like wanted to beat me up in high school, like this girl, and I sort of like had in my memory been like, she's the only person to blame here, and then like reread the particular entry of what had kind of led up to that. And it was a person that I had been dating at the time who had like told her to do that. And that was like a really big shock and sort of revelation in my head. And also like, thinking about like feminism and like how like women are demonized. It's like I had done that in my own memory for whatever reasons.
Yeah.
And I had to rewrite that. And I also was rewriting memories and actually documenting that. So it's a little bit sort of meta in the book, where I'll tell you what happened, and then I'll say, actually, my sister said she was there and I don't remember.
Yeah. She remembered a different car. She remembered, there being 2 seats versus 3. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting, like, especially with like memoir writing, it's like, how much can we trust our own memories, but at the same time it's like our experiences are what's dictating like who we are and like how we move through the world. So are our experiences like valid? Are we remembering them correctly, or is it just kind of like what we left with from the situation? So I really appreciated you pointing that out, like, you know, and saying like, well, I thought it was this way, but then when I recounted this, like, to my sister, you know, she actually said it was a totally different way. And that made me kind of second guess like my own like memories or like, you know, past experiences that I had. So I think it's cool that like in the process of like learning more about you and like your experiences, like, you know, the reader is also able to sort of interrogate our own kind of like memories and experiences and, you know, think about like the validity of them versus like what reality was for maybe someone else that was like in the situation with us. So that was cool.
Yeah, what that brings up for me, what you're saying too, is like there's a couple like layers to it. To me, it's like in memoir we talk often about like fact versus truth, right? Like what is undeniably a fact, but also what is the truth or what is like the essence of the thing. And so we're often trying to focus on the truth because if you ask 5 people in a room what just happened, 5 different answers, you know, are going to hear. And then I also think about like as a person with bipolar disorder, when I disclose that, and especially like in writing people in literature, there's like a tendency to immediately apply the unreliable narrator sort of, you know, messaging. And my point also is that we're always unreliable narrators. And so should that discount what happens or what my experience is? And like, I don't think so. So hopefully by being truthful about my process of trying to get to some semblance of like as accurate as possible, nothing will ever be perfect, and still the story is important.
Absolutely. For that, like you saying that like reminds me of like a big theme in the book for me was like secrets or like family secrets. And again, like I say that like, you know, it's very vulnerable like reading someone else's like memories or experiences because you're learning so much about like the fabric of like who they are and like where they come from. And because like that narrative really emerged for me of secrets, I guess I was curious about like how did it feel to then be putting these secrets kind of like, you know, to pen and paper or to computer and type, I don't know. You know, how did that feel? Because you were sort of like bringing, you know, those secrets out of the shadows, and in a way you are literally like keeping the record for whoever else is in your family in the future to like actually like know about these secrets and like beyond, right?
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about it that far yet. I'm like already I'm like, whoa, that's another layer, right? The future. But in putting what pixels or whatever on the computer, right? Well, one of the things that I struggled with was like I knew I wanted to tell certain things, and like unearthing my own secrets is a different process than maybe unearthing secrets of my family. And in that way too is like trying to figure out what is the line between, again, my pursuit of like sharing my truth, but also wanting to be respectful, wanting to, you know, innately protect like my mom, for example.
Right.
And, you know, I think that answer is going to sort of, and like that process is going to differ from writer to writer. There were certain chapters that I did let my mom read beforehand because, like, for example, in the relationship where I'm talking about an aunt who passed away and sort of their beef, essentially.
Right.
I was like, is this feel like an accurate representation? And like, do you have any objections to it? And, you know, and if she did, you know, that would have been a conversation. But it's true that in telling my own stories, I'm also telling stories of my family. And so I hope that in rooting it so much in my experience and my perspective, there's sort of like a level of like integrity that remains. But I have been bracing myself for like which family member, you know, is going to come out of the woodwork and like be upset with something I wrote. I haven't had that yet, actually. I've had quite the opposite, where like some family members actually and like friends of family have reached out and have been like, I'm so glad you wrote this, which has been surprising. But I'm not sure what that'll look like, and what, you know, if we check back in like a year, if folks, you know, might be upset. But I just try to do the best that I could to root it in my experience. And you know, not like disclose things that I felt were unsafe. And sometimes I anonymize things, like people's names and things like that.
Right. So. Yeah, I guess it's like probably about balance, right? Like you don't, well, not that you don't, but I guess it's an option to, like, for example, be like Carl Ove and just, you know, like put everything out there, like, you know, friends and family can kind of deal, and then your work sort of like comes first. But I think for each person, it seems to be, you know, something like they have to decide for themselves, right? And it's like it's a taking and giving kind of like process, because really, like, our stories don't exist without other people. You know, our experiences are not in a vacuum. So I'm sure, like, your mother, for example, was probably grateful to be included in that process, and in a way she's also like creating with you, right? Like giving you kind of like feedback on what's accurate or what should stay, or like what can go, according to like her own like comfort level. So it's a collaborative process as well.
And I will say, depending on the essay, I would check in with her. There's an essay, the where the title comes from, FOR FLACA, actually, where she appears in it, but I didn't check in with her because I knew that that was an essay about my own experience with my body.
Right.
And I didn't want, you know, maybe like her feelings to sway the way that I, you know, wrote that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you balanced it, right? Like you kind of like listened to your gut in terms of like, oh, I should check in about this versus, you know, not. One of my favorite parts of the book with your mom, I mean, I won't spoil it, but is with the house, and you know, kind of how she was able to maneuver that. I was like, yes. I was like cheering, you know, along in the book. So you can tell your mom, you know, that at least one of your readers was super into that.
That was a good example of a secret that is gonna be sort of revealed, but she was surprised, but was also like, well, it's the truth. So she also falls back on like, well, it happened, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it is what it is, right? At that point. So one thing that I found to be not what I was expecting going in, was that like the book reminded me a lot about like how hard it is to be a kid, and specifically how like really intensely emotional and like just like a lot it is to be a teenager, right? Like you, once you become an adult, I think you kind of like remember things like about like being a teen or being a kid, but like that, your book just really immersed me in like the difficulty of like that time period in most people's lives, like no matter like essentially what's going on, like just being a teenager in general is like a source of great like emotional like angst and like, you know, like pain and like new experiences. And so I found myself being thrusted kind of like back into that like experience. So I just thought that was like a really interesting place to revisit that I hadn't been, you know, mentally like in a long time. Was there anything like about yourself as a teen like that you were revisiting that like kind of like surprised you, or like any experiences that you sort of like had forgotten about?
Yeah, that essay in particular, there's it's called So Rich, So Pretty, is the one that's very much about high school. There's also the one about teen pregnancy. That one was a little bit easier to write, but the one So Rich, So Pretty was the last essay that I was able to write. And it's because it was such a hard time. And, you know, without giving away too much, that essay talks about sort of the roots of what I consider like my eating disorder that I had when I was in high school or early adulthood. And that was a really hard thing to remember. And the relationship aspect really surprised me again. Like I had already sort of mentioned earlier in this conversation, just some of the people that I was dating, or a lot of like young like boys that I was around. I remember distinctly in high school, after I transferred to like an alternative high school program, meeting other young boys and being like, oh, they're not like all super awful in this like very particular way that I had experienced growing up.
Right.
And having the diary of that time, that's like the most well documented time in my diary. That was really hard to read. And there was whole memories that I had not remembered, where, you know, someone would mistreat me, and then later I'd be like, they're so sweet, they're the awesomest person, and it's like,
the
what?
nicest boy in school. Yeah.
Yeah, like literally that's what I wrote. And
Yeah,
you just 3 pages before, and you're like, dude, that kid broke your glasses. Why did you, you know? And it's just hard because I don't know what had happened in that time, but I think just like the bar was so low that any semblance perhaps of
kindness or yeah. I also wonder if it's like partially like our brains like protecting us, right? And keeping us from remembering. Maybe if we remembered every detail about, you know, our lives, like, you know, we just wouldn't be able to move on and like exist on a day-to-day basis, right? So maybe it's like a self-protection kind of thing. Because yeah, there are certainly times that I've like revisited you know, things I've written. I didn't keep diaries growing up, but there, like when I've revisited sort of like text messages or like even papers that I had written, I'm like, you know, who is this? You know, like, I can't believe I said this, or like, I can't believe I thought this, or like, oh, this is interesting, right? So it's almost like getting to relearn yourself in a way, and almost befriending, like, you know, I had the sense that you were sort of like befriending like your younger self, you know, and returning and kind of like seeing what her experiences were, and kind of like, oh, I wish I could like step in as like the adult version and like guide you along, or, you know, tell you like what's really up with like this situation. So it was interesting to like revisit. And I'm sure that everyone that will be reading will be revisiting like their teenage selves and sort of like evaluating those like memories and, you know, those experiences. But I had a question about, so FLACA, like I had to Google what FLACA meant like before I read the book, because initially it was like, is FLACA like, you know, like a relative, or is it like, you know, a family member that like we're having like the funeral for? And I don't want to give too much away, but I also do want to ask you like about FLACA and about you, right? Like, do you feel like you and FLACA like are two different people? Does it feel like, you know, that's like, I guess, does it feel like it's like a younger self versus a current self? Or does it feel like, you know, FLACA is how I exist in one world and Emily is how I, you know, exist currently and have existed in a separate world, and like I'm a combination of the two? Or does it feel like, you know, they're different entities for different kind of like circles, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I love this question. It's super interesting. So flaca, it translates to skinny girl.
Right.
And growing up, that's what my family called me, and I was like super thin. And then you'll read more about sort of my relationship to that name. But essentially, at some point, my family didn't call me that anymore, and I noticed. And it's, you know, it's interesting because I've been referring to like the cover and sort of the art that accompanies it as a burning and like a cleanse. And it's not that I don't feel like that girl is a part of me, because I do think that everything that I've been through has shaped who I am today. And so it's not that I want to rid myself of that, but I think for me, it also represents sort of like this pressure that I put on myself. And it was a really painful loss to know that that wasn't my name anymore. And it felt like a loss of identity, not only in sort of just having a nickname, but also my relationship to my dad, and like a cultural marker also, because like I talk about in the book, like most like Mexican people that I know have nicknames, and you know, I talk about them.
We're gonna get to that. I have a lot of questions about that.
But yeah, I don't know. I would say that she's still a part of me, and yet I felt like I needed a sort of symbolic ending. And I'm turning 30 tomorrow, and I want to enter this
Happy
new.
Birthday. So nice to spend your last day of 29 with you.
Yeah, thank you. I needed a little bit of a line as I move into what's next.
Cool. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I really related to the like how you had like your family name, you know, and like your community like knew you as like Flaca, but then you were also like Emily, and other worlds that you occupied. You know, I also have like a family name, and so I really related to that in the sense of like, oh, like, you know, if your family name is usually like, it's also a version of you that your family and like your community like that you maybe came up with like knows, and then like your other name is also another version like of you, right? And it's sort of like I've always thought of it as, you know, how are these two separate identities, or are they like, you know, like pieces of me that kind of like make, you know, like who I am together. And I just thought like the cover art especially was like very symbolic, and when you were detailing you know, like in that essay, kind of like burying Flaca, you know, it's interesting because like you said that, you know, it's a part of like, you know, who you are and a part of like your experiences. But to me, like the fire, the casket on fire, you know, it kind of represents both like a death and a rebirth in a sense. And that's what I got from the essay. I don't know if that's what you were going for, but that's sort of like, you know, you weren't Flaca like anymore, and you were mourning that, but you were also stepping into more of like who Emily is, right?
Yeah, definitely. And so also on the back cover there, in addition to the coffin on fire, there is an ofrenda, which is
the offering.
Altar offering for Dia de los Muertos, and my own like relationship to death and what it means to pass changed through getting closer with the holiday Dia de los Muertos, which growing up I hadn't experienced that much. And actually in adulthood here in the Pacific Northwest, I started organizing and going to Dia de los Muertos events. And so a lot of like what that tradition is like celebrating and honoring and knowing that sort of death is inevitable. And so let's celebrate the person, who the person was, what they liked, listen to their music, eat their food.
Right.
And so I felt like this was an opportunity to like have a ceremony essentially for that version of myself. And hopefully then that makes way for what's next. But definitely was going for rebirth vibes as opposed to just like packing it away, because it's not about burying.
Right.
It's about sort of making room and like what's next.
Yeah. I also thought it was interesting you say that, because also when you were talking about like the concept of like healing, that's what that reminds me of as well, you know, towards like the end of the book, and how like you were going through that process to heal. And it's not about saying that something didn't happen, but a lot of the time it's also like acknowledging that things did happen, and you're trying to sort of like move through that and like move forward in the best way that you can. So not necessarily just like the Flaca like, you know, chapter, but just throughout the book that thread is there of like healing and sort of like moving through things, and not just with you but also with your family and you know, just the experiences that you had. So that's definitely like a really strong theme, in addition to like the rebirth as well. I also really appreciated the playlist, the conscious like playlist in there as well. So I'm excited to listen to you know, that playlist and kind of get to know more of your tia like in that way. But I wanted to talk about nicknames because I thought that was so interesting. You know, in Somali culture, like we give nicknames based off of like physical attributes, or primarily physical attributes, but also like behaviors as well. And so when you were like nicknames, I was like, nicknames, you know, like we do this as well. And I'm sure a lot of other cultures do it. But I thought it was interesting that like your two brothers, you know, have the same name, but they have different nicknames. So that I thought that was interesting. And you also know people even, you know, in their death, after their death, like by like their nicknames as well. And like your mother's, I think, nickname was an extension of like her mother's nickname. And I just thought that that similarity was really interesting because, like, for example, like, you know, in some other culture, if like a mother or father has a nickname, then like a lot of the time, like the children will be like child of like X person's like nickname, you know? So even if it's like, you know, like I have an uncle, it sounds really like intense. Like when you say it in English, it's like less intense, but like I have an uncle named like, his nickname is Big Mouth. And so all of his kids are like children of Big Mouth. So I thought that was interesting that that also extended with like your mother, right? And like you know, her mother, and like that like connectivity was super cool to me. And yeah, like it seems like it does like occur in other cultures, but I was like, oh, that's like a nice like overlap, and again linked to like the way in which like I really identified with like you having Flocka as a nickname, and then also being Emily like everywhere else, you know, because that's not always something that's like easily like explainable or an experience that like other people share. So I thought that was super cool.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. That's really cute. And it's funny that you're like, it's you know, son or daughter of, because there's not like a direct translation, but it'll be like, oh yeah, like soy la hija de Chayote, and I'm like, oh okay, now I know who you are. Like,
yeah,
I'm the daughter of Merleton squash.
Yeah, that's so funny. Yeah, and it's interesting just like how it carries on, right? And nicknames are also like recycled generationally sometimes as well. So that overlap is super cool. Do you think that, you know, since Flocka is sort of like retired, like have there been alternative nicknames that you've been given, or are you just solidly like Emily now?
Well, actually my dad, the other nickname that I don't mention in the book, but he calls me Eminem.
That's funny.
But he spells it in text messages like an M&M, like a chocolate.
Yeah, that's actually what I thought. Like when you said Eminem. Yeah,
not like the rapper.
Yeah. I thought you were gonna say he spells it like the rapper, and yeah, okay.
Like, luckily not. So yeah, he still calls me that, and like, you know, I don't like anyone outside my family to call me like M, but my family, some of them call me M or Emmy instead.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then I guess like so you do get into sort of your experiences with like your eating disorder like in the book, and just like through the years. And I thought one thing that was interesting was like you talk about how we tell ourselves things, and it's like to avoid really kind of like admitting to like what the truth is, right? Like, oh, I only do like I skip breakfast, or I only do it was interesting because like you were talking about your eating disorder specifically, but honestly it like just applies to so much, right? Because like just as human beings, and maybe it goes back to like our memories, like our brain trying to protect us from our memories, but like we do a lot of like white lies to ourselves, right, in order to like kind of stop our brains from being able to like admit to the truth or like process things. So I thought that like was really fascinating to read about, because you were specifically talking about your eating disorder, but it just seemed to like apply to so much lying we do to ourselves to protect ourselves from like admitting to what we know is true. And I was wondering like if you realized that you were like having that effect on the reader, or if you were just like so immersed in like writing about it that, you know, it didn't become like super evident.
I think one of the common questions, like when you talk about sort of any, especially like self-inflicted harm of sorts, right? The question is sort of like, how did this happen, or why did this happen? And I was trying to answer that question, the how does it happen? Not only the why, but how. And so I think that so often we are telling ourselves, we might not know their lies at the time. Sometimes I knew they were lies, but sometimes I didn't. But just being aware of what our internal dialogue, I think that's like a common struggle and something that people have to learn often. I don't think that like as a kid I really knew until I went through therapy that I had like an inner dialogue, and that inner dialogue could be false. So I didn't specifically set out to try to, you know, apply it sort of universally, but I do think that there is like what I hear, right? Like this commonality between what we tell ourselves, what we'll allow ourselves to hear.
Right.
And again, yeah, this idea of protecting ourselves or putting ourselves at harm, but also wanting to convince ourselves that that's not what's happening, sort of rationalizing it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, that's so interesting. I think we're like getting closer to time, but I'm just gonna ask you two really quick questions, and we'll see if we can just fit it in. So I really enjoyed like also reading like there was a specific part where you were talking about these breakfast burritos that like your mom would make, and I think they were ham and egg. Was that right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any other kind of like childhood like favorite treats, or like, you know, like through like your teen years or anything that you still like gravitated towards? Because even like when you were describing it, I had a really like visceral sort of like reaction, you know, when you're talking about like the tortilla kind of like you boomeranging like in your mouth. I was like, I've had that experience, you know. So I just was kind of curious about like your childhood like culinary, you know, favorites.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked me about food, and I like that's also why I wanted to talk to you, because I know that you also do really awesome food things. So also folks who are here, be sure to check her work out. But I love so many visceral memories of food growing up. One of my favorite dishes is a dish called morisqueta, which is sort of like a heaping bowl of boiled white rice topped with a sort of tomatoey charred sauce that's spicy, and then usually like a meat has been cooked in it. Usually that's pork, and then you put that in the bowl, top it with like a mountain of like cabbage, green cabbage that's been sliced, that I still try to chop cabbage, and my grandma's like, you don't know how to do this, let me do it. So I'm gonna learn one day. And then you top it with cotija, which is like the crumbly Mexican cheese that's like really salty, and some radishes on the side to sort of like bite in between, and then a lot of sour cream.
That sounds so good.
It's the best thing ever, and it's actually like what I learned later is like country folk food. Like often the meat
usually the best kind of food, by the way, like whatever is like working class food or like country food is usually like the most delicious, because it takes the most like creativity and skill.
Mm-hmm. And the meat is optional. Like well, also as a vegetarian now, mostly vegetarian, like if I travel, I'm like, okay, I have to obviously eat ribs when I'm in St. Louis or something, right?
Right.
But it's, yeah, my mom has been able to make it vegetarian, because instead of meat, she'll put like cheese instead, and it's awesome. And you can't really find it at most Mexican restaurants. You have to specifically, it's regional also. So a Michoacan style restaurant. So that's one of my favorites.
That sounds
yeah.
Where I need to find where to try that in like the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, you know,
it's hard, I'm sure.
Meet with you in Seattle and we'll find a place.
Cool. That sounds great. I feel like I have so many more questions to ask you. But I think maybe I'll just my final question would just be like, so did I see that you're writing like more memoir?
Yeah.
More in depth?
Yes. So okay. what I'm working on next.
Not to be like what's next now that your book is like has been out for
3 weeks.
Yeah. Like do you have the other book already? No, I'm kidding.
Well, actually it's the book that I started when I was like, I'm a writer, and I tried to start this book. That was in 2012. And I'm finally now able to sort of write towards it. And there's an essay that talks about being hospitalized with bipolar disorder. And I'm basically expanding that into a whole book, that sort of like what actually happened, what led up to it, and what much more detail. So I'm excited to see what it turns out like. But I finally have like maybe 4 chapters right now, which is like way more than I've had before. So I'm working on that because I am a student at Randolph College, a low residency MFA program. So that's what I'm working on.
Doing so much. Yeah, well, I'm definitely looking forward to reading that. I felt like when I was reading the chapter or the essay, a lot of like the specific like behavior things that you were describing that were leading up to it, I was like, oh, I've seen this like in, you know, loved ones before, or like, and it just made me think about so much of like, you know, whether it's bipolar disorder or anxiety or depression, so much of these things that we see in our own communities, but don't really know like the signs of, or like don't have the language around, because normally it's like not spoken about. That's sort of like what it made me, you know, reflect on. So I think your forthcoming book will be very much needed, just even beyond like your own friends and family and like community. So excited.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being in conversation, for your super thoughtful questions, and it's been nice to chat with you.
Likewise, thank you so much for including me like in this process and, you know, this book tour. And you're my very first you know, author that I've had to like ask questions before. And so yeah, it's been a really beautiful start to this. So cool. And yeah, I'm very proud of you, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow, that was great. You guys flowed so well together.
Well, you know, we had the men's rights club to really help.
Oh yeah, you guys bonded, right?
Years back.
I don't see any questions yet. I did ask people, but I have a question. So I see that you're a DJ. I have to ask, what is like to you, in your opinion, what's the best song that a couple should dance to at a wedding?
Oh no.
Sorry if that's a rough question.
That's a hard question. You know, I would just say I would answer that as because I have sort of talked to couples when I've done a couple. I haven't done that many weddings, but I like to talk them through like what songs are meaningful to you. And then there is a little bit of like, well, what can you actually dance to? But I would prefer always that like the couple presents something, because I think music is always about personal connection and your own memories. And so anything that I suggest would be only like about me. So I would say couples, y'all talk together and figure out what your songs, or maybe a handful.
Oh, that's a good answer. That's a good answer. I just like the book is really good, and the whole nickname stuff that you guys were talking about, that is so like prominent in like Latinx culture. I mean, for me, my nickname is just really embarrassing, but it's Leche growing up, because I'm very pale, and they would say Blanquita or Leche, and some of my friends in high school would call me Milk, just to. Yeah, so
drive it home.
Yeah, but we also had a FLACA at our school too, and she was, you know, she's great. But yeah, this book is I can't wait to see what you do next. This is it's really good so far. So I hope everybody who did not ask questions but are still here, please order the book, because it's really, really good, and we have it on our website.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, we still have a few minutes technically.
Yeah, please.
So any, you know, if you're wondering if it's a good question, it is. So just ask it.
Yeah. Please. Oh, we got one.
Okay.
And do you guys see it at all?
I don't.
What was your Ifrah mentioned her family nickname was? What was your family nickname?
Oh my God, I had two. So the first one is, well, it's funny because it's like you have a family name and then you have a family like nickname. So in terms of nicknames, I had two. Well, I had three, but two of them were kind of related to each other. One was like lawyer, because I wanted to be like a lawyer growing up and like go to law school and stuff. Or lawyer, as we would say. And then another one was library, because I read so much as a child and like cute. Throughout high school and stuff. I once got a certificate for like reading like 1,000 books in a year or something, like in elementary school. So they're short, but yeah.
Like 1,000.
Wow.
I actually forgot until someone reminded me. And then my other nickname was Dictator, which I think is like hilarious. Because it's like I think I always wanted things like a particular way, you know, like very kind of like exact. So yeah, family nicknames are really fun.
So we have two more questions. Another one is, does Emily feel like she's missing anything after completing the book?
Yeah, so many things. Financial resources. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, there's a lot of things missing in the world still, but I think maybe it's in reference to the book. And yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things possibly that I could have written about. But at a certain point, I felt like I had to just, close the chapter, so to speak, on this book. And then that's also why, even though I'm okay with how that essay in particular turned out about the bipolar disorder,
yeah,
I do feel like there's so much more to explore there. And that's why I'm just drawn to do a whole book about it, because I know that that is just a quick snapshot. So I think that a more thorough explanation is missing, and also it's coming. Just it's going to take a long time.
Yeah, that's really important, I think, too, because also, again, with the Latinx culture, we don't talk about mental health still. Like, it's still very like hush hush. We don't talk about that. And I think that's going to be such an important book. I can't wait to see that out in the world. We have one more question, and it's Celeste Chan said, "Thanks for this. What was the process for reconstructing memory? I appreciate how you also challenge those memories, i.e. my sister remembers differently."
Yeah, so I think with everything started with a first draft and sort of my own take. I think it's really important when you're writing memoir, especially, probably anything, honestly, is you got to write it out for yourself and how you think it needs to be. And then like that concept that I call fact checking, which comes from like my journalism background. That's something that was one of the final sort of revision steps. And my process for that was a variety of things. So one of it was, having phone calls with my sister and with my mom. And it often didn't actually I didn't show them what I'd written. I just was like, hey, do you remember this experience? I'm like writing about this memory, because I also didn't want, just like I don't want their memories to influence mine initially, I didn't want my own memories to influence how they retold the story, because also it's like memory is very malleable like that, right? So it was a combination of phone calls, sometimes actually, showing the text and seeing if there was something that they, sort of thought was missing, or like, yeah, that seems like good. And then for actually like immersing myself in memory, it's just sort of like really thinking about being there, being around. And then again, that fact checking piece comes later. So one of the things that was interesting was that particular essay of the bipolar, actually it's an essay called "I'm Not Ready to Make Nice." But I actually was able, in conversation with my publisher, because he happened to be at the party that I referenced, which I didn't know, he told me what bar it was at. And then I was able to use that to Google what issue had come out at that time. And then I was able to actually put more clear timestamps on things. So conversations through people, and then also the internet or other documents like diaries, or I imagine in the future also, when I write my memoir about bipolar disorder, I'll eventually like consult medical records, but I'm saving that until later, because I don't want it to influence yet how I remember things.
That's really interesting. Yeah. Well, I think that is time. Really enjoyed this. This was awesome. Thank you two for coming and doing this. For everybody out there, order. We have a copy of the Funeral for FLACA here, ready to be shipped out or picked up here in person at any 3 of our locations. And yeah, I hope you guys have a great night. Have a great weekend coming up. And thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thanks to everyone in the chat and in the Zoom. Thank you all. And Ifrah, thank you so much.
Yeah,
thank you. Spencer, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
All right.
Hi, Celeste. Hi, Erica. Hi, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.